sounding like that, it'll be cynical depression.
Disney Comics never published. Comic strip. There you go.
Those are the best ones.
Yeah.
The never published ones.
I believe this is Don Yippis. And, oh yeah, we were trying to emulate, you know, the Roger Rabbit movie by having like live action along with, you know, the cartoon drawings. So this was a brilliant idea we had but King Features Syndicate didn't go for it. But,
well, let's officially open our panel
yeah,
by
let's
having
open our panel.
each panelist
now you know what we're talking
introduce
about.
themselves and give us a little background.
Okay.
You're first.
All right.
You are
Begin.
first. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Len Uhley, and I began my animation writing career at Walt Disney TV Animation in about 1985. I was on staff there for 5.5 years. I continued to write animation. I was involved with a couple of panels here about the X-Men animated series this weekend, but I've written over 200 episodes. I worked on Ben 10, Static Shock, When Len Before Time Home Video for those that watched that when they were young. But as I say, I began my career at Disney TV Animation, wrote about 30-some episodes. And I'm here to talk about whatever you want to talk about in terms of the episodes that I've worked on and what life was like when we were starting out on Gummy Bears and going on to DuckTales, Tailspin, Chip and Dale, Winnie the Pooh series, all those other shows that I've worked on. And now over to the people who actually have like history on their side.
A
Well,
Disney legend.
yeah, well, yeah. If you believe that. Hello, I'm Floyd Norman. I'm probably best known for animation, although I did spend 10 years with Disney Comics before I was paroled. I wrote the Mickey Mouse comic strip, this thing right here, for about 2 or 3 years. No, I think it was like 5 or 6 years. And because they couldn't find anybody else to write it. But because my career began in comics, while still a kid in high school, I worked for Archie Comics while still in high school before going to the Walt Disney Studios to actually begin my career in animation. So I've had the good pleasure of working with this gentleman and so many others, Willie Ito, sadly, who couldn't be here today, so many great artists and writers in Disney's publishing department. I just had a ball. I took the job because I was going to stay at Disney Comics for 2 years. And I ended up staying for 10 years. Why? Because it was so darn much fun. And so I went back to film in 1993, but I still look back with fond memories on Disney Comics.
Well, I'm Mike Royer, and in 1979, I got a phone call from Sparky Moore, and he said they are looking for some freelancers in the Disney Foreign Comic Division. I went in and took samples, got some freelance work, and after a couple of weeks, I got a phone call from the head of the Consumer Products Creative Department, and he said, "How would you like to come in and talk about your future?" And I thought, oh, I'm going to get a steady gig. And I came into the office and I talked to Mr. Don McLaughlin, and he said, "How would you like to come on staff?" And in less time than it takes to tell, I said, yes. And I went to work with a group of incredibly talented people, and for the guy that grew up wanting to draw things like Flash Gordon and Tarzan and yada yada, I found that my real bag was Bigfoot. And I got to work with some of the most talented, entertaining, fascinating people, and he doesn't believe me, but when I ran into him Friday evening, Floyd Norman is one of those guys that is so charismatic. To me, he is not 1 day older than when I met him in what, 1980?
I'm really old, though.
No, someone corrected me, the word is older.
Older. Well, I am older than when we first met, but I don't know, I remain youthful because of comics. I think that's what does it. It keeps me young.
Well, this carbon unit is older than I'd like it to be, but between my ears, I'm 30. And I think that's why guys like these are magical, because, I tell people I have 3 responsible adult children who are all older than me.
Yeah, it sounds like my kids too, with one exception.
We're fortunate that we get a chance to do something that keeps us feeling young. If you're doing something you love, whatever it is, as these gentlemen and their careers indicate, you're very fortunate because it does keep you young and excited about the work that you do. I look to them and I say, okay, let me see if I can get to that. Let me see if I can be vertical by the time, you know. But they are a testament to the creativity, the love that we see for the work that they do, the work that you all do. So I'm thrilled to be up here with you guys. This is very cool.
Well, I'm still entertained by the cartoons that Floyd did for me years ago. The funniest, spontaneous guy I've ever met. Everyone found out that I loved the movie Blade Runner. Talked about it a lot, and I still have the cartoons he drew of the door to my apartment with the big neon signs that say "Showing Tonight, Blade Runner." We were sitting on the bench one day, and one of the girls in animation walked by with gorgeous long hair to the bottom of her bum, and I said, "I'd like to give her 100 strokes." I have a pile of 100 strokes gags that he just did on the spur of the moment at any time, and he deserves the Disney Legend title.
That young woman worked at Industrial Light and Magic. We all adored her because we found out she worked for George Lucas. And she worked on Star Wars.
And she's in the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
And she's in the last scene
steps.
of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah, she's amazing. And because Lucas was running out of money while doing Star Wars, he gave the staff a piece of the action. You know, a teeny tiny piece. But the money has never stopped coming in because it seems Star Wars had legs. Who knew, you know, back in 1977 that this film would last longer than a couple of years.
Yeah.
But apparently it's still out there and it's still making money. And for 100 strokes, those checks are still coming in. Anyway, well, how do we start on Disney Comics?
Well, consumer products.
Consumer
the
products.
overall umbrella.
Yeah.
When people ask me how long I was a Disney artist, I rephrase it and point out that I was 15 years on staff and 7.5 years full-time for the Disney stores. So I was a product designer and character artist for Disney for 21.5 years, but technically as a Disney artist, it was only the 14 plus on staff. But in whatever year it was, 93, I was faced with either taking a 44 Magnum to work or quitting. So I took our boss to work and I took her hand and we were having a glass of wine and I said, "Susan, have you heard me talk about how life is an adventure?" And she said, you say that all the time. And I said, "Well, I'm going to live it, I'm quitting." And she did everything to get me back beyond offering me more money. But I said no. And I told my wife that morning to clip all the Calcan coupons out of the newspaper. And I was lucky. Immediately, the Disney stores called me and said, "Please work for us." Because as it turned out, as a freelancer, Susan blacklisted me for 7 years. But the Disney stores said, "Please work for us. You'll never be out of work. You don't have to come in. Just fax it." And that 7 years was the most rewarding years of my entire career from a creative standpoint and financial. And if you ever bought anything Winnie the Pooh in the Disney stores in 93 through 2001, I probably created it or drew it or both. The Disney stores product was primarily embroidery, so that it would be different than the licensed product you could find in the department stores. And the Disney stores, bless their hearts, bought everything that I sent them, whether they produced it or not. And half of it was never produced because it would have cost more than $0.25 a day for that poor person in the hut somewhere in the South Pacific who was doing the embroidery. I'm facetious, I'm sorry. But the Disney stores called me the Pooh Man. And when stuff would come over from licensing at the studio, they would say, take this and do your magic. So I'm proud of those 7 years.
More poo.
Yeah.
It was more.
But I also did 3D. Now, somebody said, well, do you have copies of everything you did? And I said, well, if they'd ever been nice enough to give me one, I'd need a warehouse. But I was extremely proud of the kitchen ceramic set with the Pooh characters, which I gave to my daughter, because my wife said it doesn't fit the decor, honey. But, and my grandson grew up with Disney products on the wall in his bedroom next to the original art. Because when you go freelance, they give you the option, they're supposed to, of signing a work for hire contract, or they buy you out. But if you don't sign the contract, they have all proprietary rights to your artwork, but they don't own the art.
Now, did you also do the story books that we saw as consumers? The reason I ask is I wrote one Winnie the Pooh episode for Disney TV animation, and it became a storybook, and which we read to our daughter until the cover basically fell off.
No, because if you couldn't embroider it.
You were in the stitching business. Okay, all right.
No, I did a lot of 3D stuff at the stores.
I see.
One of the things that I was really proud of was a combination snow globe bell jar that was about this big, and at the top in the snow globe is Beauty and the Beast about to dance, and there's a chandelier just above them. And then down the staircase on the front is Mrs. Potts and Chip and other characters. You go around the base, and there's the hat rack playing a violin, there's the fireplace, a dancing suit of armor, and I don't know, it was really fun creating product. And also the fact that if I'd been on staff in the old consumer products, half of they would have said, nah. But the stores, they just...
But your work in comics, didn't you, we made a movie at Disney called, science fiction movie, wasn't really cool.
My science project?
No, not that one, but you,
Oh, Tron.
no, not Tron.
No, the black hole.
The black hole. Didn't you ink?
Well,
The,
they were
the
trying to
comic.
find an artist to do the black hole, and
Yeah.
Sparky Moore had drawn some really nice samples, which
Right.
I own. And I recommended Jack Kirby, because I'd worked with Jack
Yeah.
for 10 years.
Right, they tried to...
And on my recommendation, they hired Jack. And on the one hand, it's probably the most conservative stuff Jack ever did, because he had to work with guys who were incredibly conservative.
Yeah.
And Jack, it got to the point for the very last Sunday page, Jack says, Mike, just lay it out for me. But my job, since I was on staff and had worked with Jack before, was to ink and letter all these Sunday pages. And because Jack was an impressionist, I had to redraw all of the robots and the spaceship so that they would protect the trademark when they produced toys. If that makes any sense to you.
Yeah.
That they had to be accurate to what was in the film, so the toys manufactured and the comic strips that all matched. So I had a lot of fun doing that because...
Did they even know who Jack Kirby was?
No, I had to tell them. And of course he took the job because they promised him he would get all of his original art back, and when he saw them on sale at the Circle Galleries, he was a little hot under the collar.
You mean Disney lied?
Well, I don't know. Somebody misunderstood the rules.
It was a misunderstanding.
But they gave me one of the originals because
Great.
somebody had spilled a pot of coffee on it.
Oh, there you go.
And of course, the Circle Galleries wouldn't be able to sell that.
They would today.
But I did.
All I know, I came to Disney Comics accidentally because Greg Crosby wanted me to come and work for him. Greg Crosby was sort of the creative director. He and Carson Van Osten, two young guys young and ambitious and talented, and they invited me to be a part of their little group, and I turned them down. And they asked me again, and I turned them down again. And so finally, the third try, they said, oh, come on in and just do comics for a couple of years. And I came in, and I found once I got there, it was full of my old pals like Willie Ito and Tom Yakutis and Don Ferguson and Bob Foster. Roger Armstrong was inking Pooh, I believe, and who was it who was doing Donald Duck? I was
Frank Smith.
Frank Smith was doing Donald Duck, and Ramona Romula was doing Mickey Mouse, and it was just a great time to work at Disney. And what I discovered, that unlike the film division, I had just come from film, I'd been in animation most of my career. So here I was doing comics, and in comics, nobody cared. In animation, they are all over you because Disney, they love their animation and everybody's got to put their 2 cents in. But when I was writing comics for Disney, I could pretty much write anything I wanted. And nobody bothered me, nobody edited me, nobody cared. So it was a pretty cool job, and I had a great time. And did that for a number of years. Did it for 10 years until I went back to animation. So there's something very special about comics.
Well, I had fun during the time that Floyd and the others were producing the strips for King Features, because Don McLaughlin asked me, because I had worked in comic strips, to supervise the meetings where the group got together and we went over all their storyboarded scripts for the comic strips.
The weekly meetings that sometimes interrupted into fistfights. I'm not joking. I'm saying literal fistfights at Disney because artists are passionate.
Well, my feeling is if you don't have the passion, you don't belong there.
There you go. I still laugh when I can picture Tom Yakutas taking a swing at Bob Foster, literally jumping across the conference table, swinging at him. And
well, what about the time Bob Foster threw a cup of coffee at Frank Smith?
That was what. Didn't he open his office door and throw the coffee at him?
Does anybody remember why they were fighting?
Probably not.
Over cartoons, probably. Over comics. I mean, what else would you fight over?
Well, I shared a large cubicle space before we actually had walls that went to the ceiling with Bob Foster, and I picked up some habits from him that I still do to this day. If the phone rings and I pick it up and I go, "What?"
That's how Bob answered the phone. Every phone call was, "What?" It's like you're interrupting my day by calling me.
It gets to the point rather quickly then on the other end.
It does indeed.
Do we want to open up the questions or?
Yeah, maybe the audience will help focus us. Because we're just rambling all over the place here. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I'd be interested in more specifically about the comics. So it's could you give a scenario of one case that led to a punch or a thrown cup of coffee? The details of.
I honestly don't remember the details. All I know is that this is the silly stuff we did every week. We would write this stuff and draw it.
Well, I can remember the guys that wrote the strips. They weren't anything that were typed or hand printed. They were just like storyboards.
Yeah.
And we would meet and discuss those, and then whoever the artist was would be assigned to it. And I got to sit there with all of these really talented guys, and some of the background, Floyd doesn't explain his background, but Don Ferguson came from the Jay Ward cartoon people.
Yeah, Jay Ward, funny stuff. Fergie wrote Winnie the Pooh, and his stuff was so knocked down, drag out funny. I mean, when you saw the finished strip, it was kind of conservatively drawn, inked, and everything, but Fergie's rough pencils were just hilarious.
Well,
just crazy.
Sparky Moore at this time was penciling the strip, and Larry Mayer over at Western Publishing was inking them.
Yeah.
And I have an original that Don wrote, Sparky penciled, and was inked for me by Larry. And it's Pooh and Piglet leaning on a fence, and the conversation is like, well, what is the gag going to be today? And the next one, well, I don't know, but as long as we put a cowboy in it, Mike Royer will buy it.
We spent a lot of time entertaining each other. And the fact that we were doing all this stuff, and Disney didn't care. They just left us alone, and we just did all of this hilarious stuff. But mainly, we were laughing at each other. And, that makes the job the best job in the world, because we were just having fun. I mean, some people might look at this as work, but doing this stuff every week was not like going to work. We were just having a ball, just writing gags and drawing cartoon characters and just...
Well, do you remember John Gibbon, who wrote with us? for the strips for a while. He came from a greeting card company. He wrote stuff like "Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm schizophrenic, and I am too."
Yeah.
You know, and if it was script day to go over stuff, and he hadn't come up with any ideas, there'd be a sign in his cubicle that said "Zip fish here."
What does that mean?
It means throw your line in, but nothing's going to come
Oh,
back.
I get it. Fishing metaphor. Okay, there you go.
Well, nobody knew what it meant, but it was funny.
Hey, there's a question back there.
I have a question about Carl Barks, who of course drew Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge for many years. But after
Right.
he retired, he began doing paintings.
Yeah, he
And
did.
he got permission from Disney. What do you know about that story? And was that sort of courtesy extended to other Disney artists, like you?
Yeah, didn't Carl have special permission from the company to sell his duck paintings?
For a
Yeah.
while, but when he was so successful,
Yeah.
corporate got a little jealous and told him he couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Carl, yeah, he became too successful, and that began to worry Disney because somebody else besides them was making money.
Want to hear my Carl Barks story?
Sure.
Sure.
Please.
Somebody called me. I was going to go to the comic convention in New York City, and Al Williamson called me, and he says, "Mike, bring as much money as you can with you, because there's going to be somebody here with original art. All kinds of original art." And so I went to the convention and came home with 10 pages of Carl Barks' unpublished Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck pages. And then a couple of collectors in San Francisco found out I had them, and they harangued me and offered me so much money, I couldn't say no. So the day that I met Carl at Comic-Con, I walk up at the table and I go, "Hi, my name is Mike Royer." He turned his back on me because I was the SOB that was selling his original art that he had never been paid for, because when they didn't print it, he wasn't paid for it. I didn't know he'd been paid for it, but I was the guy who was making all this money off of him.
Word got back to him then.
Yeah.
Oh my.
And finally, I stopped at his place on the river in Grants Pass, I think at the urging of, Broomhilda, Russell Meyer.
Russ Meyer. Yeah.
And we kind of made up, but his wife still never forgave me. But, and I ultimately wound up turning a couple of his paintings into line drawings for Gladstone Donald Duck comics. And I also, someone at Gold Key gave me a tissue drawing of Carl's that I finished in his style and inked and was on the cover of the comics. And I called him in Grants Pass and talked to his wife, and I said, "Can I send this up and have Carl sign it?" And she says, "No way." So the man that I'd idolized through childhood and into adulthood, and finally found out, we always knew that there was the duck artist, and we found out I had a name, and then when I introduced myself to him, he turns his back on me.
Years of therapy.
You know, I feel like Lando Calrissian. It's not my fault!
Very good. I like that.
It's the happiest place on earth, but there are a few cracks in the.
Well, we had a graphic designer in our department who was always angry, or high. She would always answer the phone, "Hi, part of the magic."
Who was that?
I can't remember. He had a loft downtown in LA, and
Part of the magic, huh?
yeah, that was on all the paperwork.
It was on, yeah, it was
people's
on our
business cards.
It was on our cards and
I
everything.
think that's
yeah.
how the TV division, that's how they answered the phone at one point.
Look, the best thing about working for Disney, as Jim Serenko told me in 1970, is you make your own perks and use the people that use you. And I was a 16mm collector.
Yeah.
And after the third quarter of Super Bowl in 1985, and they ran the only TV broadcast of
The
Ridley
Apple.
Scott's Apple
The
commercial.
Apple commercial, that's right.
And then it appeared on local TV stations and in 35 in theaters.
Right.
I had found earlier that all you had to do was, I found out that Chiat Day was the advertising agency. So you dial their number and you go, "Hi, this is Mike Royer. I'm calling from the Walt Disney Studios in Burbank. I saw that commercial and I'd like to have a copy of it to put it on the front of my Blade Runner print." And they said it'll be in the mail today.
Why, certainly, sir. Right away, sir.
I was a Zorro nut. I called National Screen Service. They said, you got any of the sign of Zorro posters? And they said, we've got this, this, this. I said, would you send them to me? They said, yes, sir.
Things were simpler when there weren't an army of lawyers between you and anything you wanted to do. You could call up a studio and say, can I have this? Can I talk to so-and-so? And so usually you could get through. Now it's a little more difficult.
I could arrange a screening of Walt Disney's Song of the South by simply asking for it. I'd like a pristine 35mm print of Walt Disney's Song of the South. Could you screen it for me in projection room 2E11? Right away, sir.
Well, as a film collector, I got 60mm trailers of Blade Runner. Or no, 35mm prints of Blade Runner trailers. And I don't remember who I called at the time, but they stopped whatever they were doing in the theater, which was scoring a film, and they said, yeah, we'll run them for you. And then,
Yeah, that was a different Disney.
that kind of ended in the mid-'80s with the Eisner-Wells regime.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Wells was the best friend of us wild and zany cartoonists, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we lost him in a skiing accident,
And then,
well, our department
Yeah.
on April 1st produced the April Fool's editions of the Disney Weekly Newsreel.
that's right.
And there would be a photograph of new employees, and it's one person sitting on the curb.
Yeah.
And then the picture, new Disney vice presidents, and it's a picture of 400 guys in suits. And of course, our department head, Don McLaughlin, when he found out about this, he says, you go down and collect all those things from all the exits off the lot.
Or you're all fired.
But Frank Wells in his office is handing them out. He says, this is great.
The newsreel was the in-house sort of employee newsletter, and that was a regular publication.
Right, and so-
just for internal
Right.
consumption.
And we did our own version. We did.
Moscow Disneyland to open.
One of our outrageous gags, this is back in the 80s now, one of our outrageous gags was that the Walt Disney Company was going to open a theme park in China. Can you imagine anything that ridiculous? That the Disney Company would build a theme park in China? What was a gag in the 80s is now reality today.
I love the great moments with Jeremy and Al.
Or the Great Walt of China.
Yeah.
Okay, so if there were new management, new CEO, new VPs, new whatever, what was the expectation? Were there different expectations of your work output, or what did you get outrageous from management and go, that's not, are you crazy? Like anything that the different culture when a new management came in?
Oh yeah, well, any new management brings in, a new regime, basically. It's a new culture. And so while we were enjoying what we knew as the Disney culture, new management came in, more corporate, more hard-nosed, and a whole lot less funny. So that's what all of us wacky cartoonists have to deal with.
The whole studio would meet out at the gazebo in the back lot.
Yeah.
And they would say, don't worry, nothing will change. And the next day, 250 people were laid off.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
A
Yeah.
common theme at probably every company these days, but at the time it was unusual. In their defense, the Eisner regime made it possible for me to have a job there because one of their mandates was to create a Disney TV animation unit. So they started putting together people, culling them from various sources within the company and without, and hiring. And so that's how that became, the first shows were the Wuzzles and the Gummy Bears. And then that eventually led to the DuckTales syndication phenomenon, which
Right.
then in turn led to the Disney Afternoon. And we had at one point 4 or 5 floors of artists and writers, 18 writers on staff, dozens of artists, all turning out these extraordinary syndicated packages of 65 episodes each. And you'd go from one series to the next to the next. So that was
That's what
not
I
a
grew
bad
up on.
thing.
Yeah.
That whole
From
process
this-
is what I grew up on.
Yes.
DuckTales on 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, DuckTales and Darkwing Duck and all this. So that was me,
yeah.
what I could.
I did, I don't know, like 8 DuckTales and 5 Tailspins and co-created Bonkers and lots of other stuff. DuckTales was a wonderful experience.
Right.
Just some terrific people. That's the great
Well, when
thing.
these new management things were disturbing all of us,
Yeah.
I had a 3-screwdriver lunch. And I came back to the studio and I was talking to, I don't remember who it was, but I says, we gotta talk to Roy Jr. and just find out what the heck is going on. And so I'd had a 3-screwdriver lunch and I get on the phone and I call Roy's office. And the secretary connects me with Roy and I go, you know, we're getting kind of worried over here in consumer products. What's going on? Can we have lunch and talk about it? And he said, okay. So we had lunch a couple of days later. He picked up the tab and it was a great lunch. And the thing I remember most is he says, we are not going to do an animated TV series of Winnie the Pooh.
In their defense, the original New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh was probably the best looking thing to ever come out of the Disney TV animation unit. It was
Yes.
beautifully done, gorgeous watercolor looking backgrounds, written for them. Like I said, I did one episode, but there were people like the late Bruce Talkington and Carter Crocker, who were extraordinary writers, who understood these characters as well as anybody could. And they turned out, they won several Emmy Awards for the series. It was a stunning show. And so, you know, the fact that, by the way, my history tangentially with the Winnie the Pooh experience goes back because I grew up with Richard Sherman's kids. So I knew that family from the way back time. And you worked with them on Jungle Book.
Right.
So, you know, anything having to do with the Sherman brothers or anything like it was like, you know, looking up at the mountaintop. So it was extraordinary to me to have a chance to be involved with, even for a moment, with the Winnie the Pooh product, because it's, you know, it is such a classic. It's such an evergreen.
Well, I was never really in love with the Pooh characters. And when the graphic designer who was given the assignment of retooling Pooh, when at the end of '93, the Sears 30-year exclusive contract was up.
Yeah.
And, you know, the place you could buy Pooh merchandise was at Sears and at the parks. And she came to me and she said, Mike, would you like to retool the look of the characters? And I said, only if you let me do what I'd like to do. And they wound up signing off on it. And I called it finished animation rough. No lines connected. It was loose, but of course, it was really thought out. Would this one be on the outside or would it be on the inside and so on? And I'm proud of the fact that because of that style that I came up with, and bless their hearts they signed off on, in a year and a half we were outselling Mickey Mouse worldwide.
Now, when did the stores begin? What was the first year of the first Disney stores?
Probably,
Is that the 80s or the 90s? No, the 80s, I think, late 80s, because I had meetings
I
with...
seem to remember early 90s, but I have an older man's memory.
Well, I do know that we had a meeting with Carson, and Michael Eisner said, I'd like to open a store. You know, okay, Michael, you'd like to open a store. You know, let's make some more money. And so, at one point, this is really a true story, at one point, you were going to enter the Disney store by sliding down a rabbit hole.
That's
True story. You go in the mall, and there'd be this hole, and you would literally go down the rabbit hole and end up in the Disney store.
Armies of lawyers saying, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
and how decisions are made. Everybody in our consumer products creative was to give our idea of what would be a logo for the store.
Yeah.
And Russ Farrell, an excellent designer,
Right.
had the Mickey Mouse with the clapboard. Carson did not like it. Russ snuck it into the pile that went into the decision makers, and guess which one was chosen? Mickey on the clapboard.
Which is still being used to this day, I think.
Probably.
I still see it around, yeah. By the way, Russ Farrell's son, Robert Farrell, is now working at Disney. So, you know, in a way, Russ never left us. He's still there, only now it's his son. So
Gene pool.
there you go. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The gene pool is deep.
Yeah.
The secretaries, in a way, they didn't dislike us, but they were angry with the fact that we didn't have to punch time cards. But I don't think they realized that if they read the fine print on our salary checks, it was for 56 hours, which we never really worked 56 hours, except the rare occasion that would be some program we had to get done, and we would work. I remember we hand colored all the stats for the Dick Tracy Music Company comic books on a weekend in a conference room.
Yeah.
And somebody would do all the raincoats, somebody would do all this, somebody would do all this, and there were like 8 or 10 of us around a table, and just with markers, and that's how we colored. But our checks, if you looked, it was 56 hours. So there would be times that we would leave an hour early because there was nothing happening. But they never noticed the times that we were there all night
Yeah,
or weekend.
yeah.
So for those who are interested in the writing or an artist career, the fact is it is a 7-day-a-week job. There's no punching out when you have something that you want to create.
Yeah.
You just do it until it's done. And regardless of what it takes, it doesn't matter the overtime. It's nice to get an overtime payment, but that never happens that I'm
Well,
aware
it
of.
helps to be lucky enough that you love what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly that.
This lady understands what we're talking about.
Well, I work for Disney Publishing.
Yes.
And I have to leave here today because I've got to go home and work. I have a deadline.
Right.
And even though tomorrow is a holiday, I have a deadline this week, so I have to go home and I have paid.
Right.
We laugh in the face of.
Yeah, artists have no holiday.
We don't have
Yeah.
no holiday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, talking about the regime changes, what was the name of that little guy who became the head of the animation division?
Well, the
Because he's the villain in the first Shrek, by the way. That prince is based on him, on Peter.
Oh, no, yeah, different fella. No, Disney TV animation started.
No, I'm talking about feature animation.
Oh, feature animation. Yeah. Well, you probably shouldn't say names on video.
He went on one of my horseback rides in Lone Pine, and he said, "Can I bring my 15-year-old daughter along?" She's an experienced equestrian, and I said, "Okay." It was usually adults. Well, when they showed up, she was 12, and we never saw him the rest of the day. So we got to babysit the head of Walt Disney Feature Animation's daughter on horseback.
This is a very heavy responsibility.
Yeah, you can't lose her. Yeah.
We can only tell the truth about people who are no longer with us.
Well, I think that gentleman you're referring to is still alive and well, and so for the sake of our careers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm retired.
Oh,
Yeah.
What are they going to do, fire me?
Luckily we no longer have careers, so we're safe.
I understand you're working harder now than you ever did.
Yes, I am. Or I don't know if he is, but yeah.
I'm thank goodness, 31 years later, I'm still writing animation. But you just got a new gig, if memory serves. Punch.
Yeah. Well, that's not possible. Could be,
I
maybe.
saw press release.
Yeah. Wouldn't you know it? A press release. Talk about letting the cat out of the bag. Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, apparently
It's on Facebook. Floyd.
it's on Facebook.
There are no secrets on Facebook.
This is alternate news. Just because it's on Facebook doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean it's true.
It's an alternate fact.
This man did me a great favor. I wanted to stretch my muscles, and he was an expert at finding time to, outside of Disney, do storyboards for other animation studios, for TV cartoons.
Yeah, that's true.
And I wanted to stretch my muscles, and I asked him who were handing out storyboard assignments. And he gave me a list, and one of them was Bagdasarian Jr., with the Alvin and the Chipmunks Go to the Movies was the new series.
Ross Jr.
And he told me, he says he's the worst SOB in the business to work for.
No more lawsuits.
Or maybe someone else told me that. So I thought, then that's who I want to go to. And of course, there was a conflict of interest because we have chipmunks.
Yeah.
And I went over and talked to their producer, and in 2 weeks, I did 4 weeks worth of work. I storyboarded Alvin and the Chipmunks' Chip Tracy, because we just finished Dick Tracy.
Chip Tracy?
Chip Tracy. And Bagdasarian, the man that everybody told me was so tough to work for, I met with him once. He looked at my storyboard and he said, "It's so nice to see someone using their imagination." The fee was $6,000 for the board, He wrote a check for $8,000, and the producer gave a letter, which is in my portfolio, that said my work was Eisensteinian. And as it turned out, 25% of it they revised because they couldn't afford to do it, but they loved the imagination. And if he hadn't told me that Bagdasarian was a tough guy to please,
Yeah.
and I just took that as a challenge. You know, if I had flopped, it wouldn't have been his fault, but I wanted to stretch my muscles beyond mice and ducks.
Yeah. You know, his dad, Ross Bagdasarian Sr., is in Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window. My wife and I were just watching that movie a couple of weeks ago. It's really a great Hitchcock film, for those of you who are Hitchcock fans. And so that's Ross Bagdasarian, who is the creator of Alvin and the Chipmunks. You were working for Ross Jr., you know, Ross's son, and I like Ross Sr. better, but
Ross Sr. was the original Dave Seville.
Dave Seville, that's right.
On the records, it was saying,
Anyway, but I did a lot of Alvin's and the Chipmunks and the Chipettes too. I did Chipettes as well. So we had a good time, and so I'm glad he paid you a lot of money.
Well, when you work under the same roof with a man like this, you can't help but challenge yourself to do better, because, you know, I was never his peer in anything. This guy influenced me to do better work, to be funnier. You.
Really?
And I still have every one of those 100 Strokes and Blade Runner cartoons that you made for me.
Well, we all love the same stuff, you know. We love the same science fiction movies. We love Star Wars.
Well, I would occasionally have people from the department down to my house on a Saturday night, and we'd watch 16mm films in my home theater.
We would watch movies in his home theater. I mean, those were good times. Good times in the comic book business, good times in the animation business. Now, nobody has good times anymore. Everybody just works really hard. Isn't that true? I mean, there are all these young kids, and they're all just working. And there's nothing wrong with working. We work too. But there's that one component that's missing, and that is the fun. We had a lot of fun when we were doing cartoons.
I think it's the time that we were born and were raised in.
Yeah.
We can sit down and listen to a half-hour radio show, comedy or drama, and paint all the pictures in our head.
Yeah.
Today's audiences, in a minute and a half, are bored because they cannot paint the pictures, because everything has been shown to them in movies and television, thanks to CGI.
Yeah.
And we grew up developing imaginations.
Right.
You know, you could see a movie like M, and Peter Lorre watches the little girl go into the park, you know, and you know he's the molester. And then there's an aerial shot of the trees, and the balloon she's carrying goes floating up through the trees. The music reaches a crescendo, and it's like radio. It was as horrible as we could imagine.
Yeah.
So I think it's when the years we grew up and what we experienced and what entertained us and piqued our imagination.
Yeah, we had to be more creative, you know. We just had to think smarter and make films work. Now we have amazing digital tools that do too much of the work for us. And so it's made audiences lazy. It's made filmmakers lazy, because now they could do anything. And so because we have these amazing tools that can enable us to do anything, there's kind of, films aren't as, at least in my opinion.
There isn't anything you can't put on the screen except characters you care about.
Yeah. And so after a while, all this stuff begins to be one big digital mush. And like, man, I missed the old days when animators picked up a pencil and drew on paper. That simple. They picked up a pencil and they drew on paper. And whatever ended up on that sheet of paper had to come from the artist. Not from a machine, not from a computer, but from the artist. And that connection, I think, is missing today.
Well, the animators, guys like you were actors. And you acted on paper, and you know, you had a mirror that you could make any face or expression you wanted because you were acting on paper.
Do you think that the fact that you're one step removed from the pencil and the pegboard, the interface with the computer takes something away from the range of expression, the ability to
Yeah.
put emotion into the character.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. There is a disconnect, and I hope that in time we can correct that. But at least for me anyway, there is a disconnect because there's something between the creator and the audience, and there shouldn't be. You know, that connection is critical to touch an audience. You know, the audience has to resonate with that image on screen. And that's got to be, you know, we've got to make that connection. The old man knew that. When I worked with Walt Disney, that was one of the things Walt always emphasized. The audience has to connect with what we put on screen. They don't care about the story, not really. They care about the character. If you don't care about the character, it doesn't matter what happens in the story. You know, story is no consequence. You've got to care. You've got to love that character. And if you do, you love that character for the rest of your life, you know. And proof of this is that all of these Disney characters that were created back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, they're just as alive today as they were back then. Because those characters live. And Walt made us realize that we had to make our characters live so they would never be forgotten. And I think that's why those films are so strong.
Well, are there any computer-generated animated films that could make us cry like we did when we never even saw it, but Bambi's mother was killed? You know, Dumbo and his mother, I mean, these two-dimensional colored drawings could make you cry because you gave a damn about this characters you were watching.
Yeah. Although my wife's favorite Pixar film, I think, is Monsters Incorporated, because we really do connect with Boo. We care about that little girl.
Yes.
And we understand Sully and Mike's relationship with Boo. And so I was very proud to work on that film. Monsters, Inc., even though it's a Pixar film, it is very much a Disney film. You know, at its core, it is a Disney film. And that's why it resonates so with audiences. Have we strayed away from comic strips?
Well, it was consumer products, comic strips, publishing, television.
Right.
We've been given the signal that we need to vacate momentarily, but I think we should give these panelists a real hand of applause. This is a table of talent, and you'll find at these conventions today, many of the guests, these are people that one day, when you miss them and realize you will never see their likes again because how they grew up, what they grew up with. And I think that's fantastic. This guy always urged me, whether he knew it or not, to do a better job.
We grew up.
I just met Len today for the first time, but it's your work history and the time that it happened. I think that's important. And I think it's important that everyone in the audience understands that.
The extraordinary thing to me is to hear a very rare phrase, when I worked with Walt Disney. I mean, that's kind of like, okay, beat that anybody. Because that's like, okay, founding father here. Okay? So it's extraordinary and
Right place at the right time.
well, dumb luck and timing has been how I created my entire career.
There you go.
You know?
There you go.
So,
Right.
gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Give me leisure, sir.
Thank you. Yeah.